Welcome!
Today, we're diving into a story so unbelievable it challenges everything we know about survival and science. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe, because a lot of work has gone into uncovering every true detail of this remarkable tale. Mississippi in 1862 was a land caught in the turmoil of the Civil War, a place where the air was thick with tension, fear, and survival. Plantations stretched across the landscape, each a microcosm of power and oppression. Enslaved people labored from dawn to dusk, their lives governed by the rigid rules of their masters, leaving little room for personal freedom or safety. Amidst this backdrop, even small acts of defiance were dangerous, and survival required not only strength but sharp wits. For a young boy growing up here, every day was a precarious balance between obedience and the instinct to endure. The Civil War amplified the hardships, as the region became a battlefield not just for soldiers, but for the very fabric of society. Supplies were scarce, diseases were rampant, and the threat of violence was constant. Communities were divided, and trust was a rare commodity. For an enslaved boy, the boundaries of what was possible were constantly tested, and hope was often buried under layers of oppression. Yet, stories from this era show that resilience could shine even in the darkest corners of Mississippi. Mississippi was also a place where science and medicine were still in their infancy. Rural communities relied on home remedies, local healers, and trial and error practices rather than standardized knowledge. A boy's encounter with any scientific experiment or medical intervention in this period could quickly turn dangerous or even fatal. This setting magnifies the stakes of the story. The odds were stacked against survival, making his eventual triumph all the more extraordinary. Amidst the plantations, the cotton fields, and the war-torn towns, daily life was a series of small battles. Children were often tasked with heavy labor far beyond their years, and their value was measured by productivity rather than potential. The environment was harsh, unforgiving, and entirely controlled by adults in power. For the boy at the center of this story, navigating this world required not just physical endurance, but an extraordinary mental strength that would soon be tested in ways no child should ever face. This setting is crucial because it frames the story not as a simple tale of survival, but as an epic of human resilience against overwhelming odds. It's a world where survival was rarely guaranteed, where science could be deadly, and where the spirit of one boy would ultimately challenge everything people thought they knew about life. The body and the limits of human endurance. The boy at the center of this unbelievable story was no more than 12 years old, though life had forced him to grow up far faster than most children his age. Born into slavery in the Deep South, he had known hardship from the very beginning. His early memories were not of school or play, but of long days under the scorching sun, bending over cotton plants, and the harsh commands of overseers. Despite his youth, he carried the weight of responsibilities that would have overwhelmed most adults, and his spirit had already begun to develop a resilience that would later define his story. Life on the plantation was structured around strict routines designed to maximize labor, not nurture children. From the break of dawn, he worked alongside older slaves, learning the rhythms of the fields and the silent, coded ways of resisting cruelty without drawing punishment. The conditions were grueling, blistering heat, inadequate food, and constant exhaustion. Yet, even in this oppressive environment, the boy demonstrated remarkable intelligence and curiosity. He observed patterns in nature, learned small tricks to avoid injury, and, unknowingly, was preparing himself for challenges that would one day seem impossible to survive. His family life, like that of many enslaved children, was fragile and uncertain. He may have had siblings or parents nearby, but the threat of being separated at any moment was ever present. Despite this instability, he learned to form deep emotional bonds, understanding human behavior in a way that would later aid his incredible survival. These early lessons in observation and empathy were crucial. The boy's ability to read situations, anticipate danger, and act decisively became one of his greatest tools, even when faced with experiments that defied logic. What made him truly remarkable, however, wasn't just the harshness of his environment, but his insatiable curiosity. Even in a world that demanded submission, he asked questions, watched the adults around him carefully, and sought to understand more than just survival. It was this curiosity, combined with a natural intelligence, that unknowingly set him up for a confrontation with science that would test his body and spirit in ways no child should endure. He wasn't just surviving, he was quietly preparing for the impossible. By the time the fateful events occurred, this young boy had already internalized lessons that most adults never fully grasped: endurance, observation, adaptability, and courage. These traits, born out of the brutal circumstances of his early life, would become central to the story that defied science itself. In understanding his background, viewers can begin to grasp why, against all odds, he was capable of surviving a situation that should have claimed his life. His youth and vulnerability make his triumph all the more extraordinary, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit in the harshest of circumstances. The year was 1862, and Mississippi was a place where superstition and the earliest forms of science often intersected in unsettling ways. Medical knowledge was rudimentary, and experimentation was sometimes conducted on the most vulnerable, with little thought for ethics or consent. The boy's life, already full of hardship, became entwined with one such experiment, a scientific test that was supposed to push the boundaries of human understanding but had no room for failure. In this environment, curiosity wasn't just encouraged, it was a survival tool. The boy's natural inquisitiveness made him notice details others overlooked, but it also placed him directly in the path of danger. The experiment itself was designed by a local doctor who prided himself on pushing scientific boundaries, often at the expense of morality. It involved exposure to extreme conditions, testing the body's limits, and applying remedies that were more guesswork than medicine. The boy was chosen, or perhaps volunteered in a moment of bravery, because of his resilience and intelligence. Witnesses later described the setup as daunting, with strange instruments, heated surfaces, and chemical mixtures that no child should ever encounter. What the adults saw as a scientific opportunity, the boy experienced as a life or death challenge, testing his endurance far beyond anything the plantation had demanded. Despite the fear and danger, the boy's curiosity played a critical role. He didn't just comply passively, he observed the instruments, the reactions, and even the patterns of the adult handlers. His mind raced, calculating risks, anticipating mistakes, and finding tiny ways to protect himself. This mental agility, honed through years of harsh labor and vigilance, became his first line of defense. Every glance, every hesitation, every movement could mean the difference between survival and disaster. In a way, the boy's natural intelligence and sharp observation were just as important as his physical strength. The community around him reacted with a mix of awe and horror. Onlookers could hardly believe a child was at the center of such an extreme scientific test, yet the boy's composure under pressure shocked them. They watched as he endured procedures that would have left most adults incapacitated. It was during this period that his legendary resilience began to take shape. What the doctors and scientists did not realize was that they were not merely testing his body, they were unwittingly witnessing the extraordinary power of human will and instinct. By the end of the experiment, the boy had survived conditions that should have been fatal, challenging every assumption about the limits of human endurance. His combination of curiosity, intelligence, and instinctual survival skills had allowed him to navigate a perilous situation that others believed no one could endure. This experiment, meant to push science forward, instead highlighted something far more profound: the indomitable resilience of a young boy whose courage and intellect far exceeded what anyone in 1862 Mississippi could have imagined. The experiment had already pushed the boy's limits, but nothing could prepare him or the witnesses for the moment when disaster struck. One misstep, one slip of the hand, or one misjudged reaction turned the scene from controlled observation into chaos. A tool tipped, a chemical spilled, or perhaps a piece of machinery malfunctioned. Accounts vary, but the result was immediate and terrifying. Everyone present froze in shock as it became clear that the accident could have ended a grown man's life, let alone a 12-year-old child. In that instant, time seemed to stretch, and the boy's fate hung by the thinnest of threads. The physical impact of the accident was severe. He was struck, burned, or otherwise injured in a way that would incapacitate nearly anyone. Pain coursed through him, yet what set this story apart from so many others of the time was how he responded. Rather than succumbing to panic or collapse, he relied on instinct and sheer determination. His training from years of surviving harsh labor on the plantation, the long hours in the sun, the constant vigilance against overseers, and the necessity of rapid thinking under pressure, came to his aid in the most extraordinary way. Witnesses described an almost surreal scene: a boy, clearly injured, maneuvering himself with precision and awareness that seemed far beyond his age. He assessed his surroundings, avoiding additional dangers while attempting to minimize the harm. Every move he made was critical, a matter of life or death. What should have been a fatal accident became a testament to his presence of mind, resilience, and almost uncanny ability to survive against odds that defied logic and the expectations of everyone watching. The accident also highlighted the stark realities of 1862 Mississippi. Medical care was primitive, and access to proper treatment for an enslaved child was practically non-existent. Those around him could do little but watch, perhaps fearing intervention might worsen his condition. Yet, in spite of the injury and the lack of professional care, he endured. His body's resilience, combined with his mental focus, allowed him to withstand trauma that would have been fatal in almost any other circumstance, turning a potential tragedy into the first step of a story that would astonish generations. Ultimately, the accident became the defining moment of the boy's survival story. It was a turning point where science, human error, and the cruelty of circumstance collided, and yet the boy emerged alive, setting the stage for an extraordinary tale that challenged contemporary understanding of biology and human endurance. What made this moment so remarkable was not just that he survived, but how he did it with awareness, strategy, and a courage that seemed far beyond his years, capturing the imagination of anyone who would later hear his story. The moment the boy survived the accident, shock rippled through everyone present. Those who had been observing, expecting a tragedy, were unable to believe their eyes. The local doctor, his assistants, and even the plantation overseers stood frozen, mouths agape, as the boy, though visibly shaken and injured, began moving with a deliberate calmness that defied all expectations. Whispers spread quickly. Could it really be possible that a child had survived something that no adult was expected to endure? This disbelief was not just curiosity. It was the first recognition that something extraordinary had occurred. Word of the accident and the boy's survival traveled rapidly through the nearby community. In 1862 Mississippi, news often spread slower than it does today, but when the story carried the weight of the impossible, it moved like wildfire. Neighbors and other enslaved individuals came to see the boy for themselves, each arrival filled with skepticism. How could such a small, frail child endure an event that should have been fatal? Their doubts transformed into awe as they witnessed him not just alive, but alert, coherent, and even aware of the gravity of what had occurred. For many, this survival defied both faith and science, leaving them both mystified and inspired. The reactions of the adults around him were particularly striking. The doctor, once confident in his control over the experiment, now had to confront a reality that challenged his understanding of the human body. Overseers who had been used to commanding submission had to reckon with a child whose willpower seemed unbreakable. Even fellow enslaved individuals, hardened by the daily cruelties of plantation life, were moved by a sense of wonder. In that moment, the boy became a symbol, an unlikely hero whose very existence questioned the limitations placed upon him by society, circumstance, and biology. Children in the community also reacted in ways that were equally telling. They watched in a mixture of fear and admiration, seeing in the boy a reflection of courage and defiance they could scarcely comprehend. Stories of survival often become legends, and in the days following the incident, the boy's tale began to take on a mythic quality among those who had witnessed it. Every retelling emphasized not just what had happened, but the boy's composure, intelligence, and uncanny resilience in the face of danger, qualities that made him an unforgettable figure in a world where survival was rarely guaranteed. Ultimately, these initial reactions set the stage for the boy's story to resonate far beyond that small community. Disbelief gave way to fascination, fascination to admiration, and admiration to a profound sense of respect for a young life that had already defied the impossible. His survival challenged the assumptions of everyone who witnessed it, leaving an indelible mark on those present and paving the way for a story that would continue to amaze and inspire. In this moment, the boy had already begun to rewrite what people thought was possible for the human body, mind, and spirit. After the accident, the tension in the room was palpable. Everyone expected the boy to falter, to succumb to shock, pain, or exhaustion. But slowly, subtle signs began to emerge that hinted at something extraordinary. His breathing, though shallow and strained, remained steady. His eyes, sharp and alert despite the trauma, tracked movements and measured the reactions of those around him. It was in these small details, the way he adjusted his position, the deliberate control in his fingers and hands, that observers first realized he might not just survive, but endure in a way that defied expectation. His body, scarred and battered from the incident, revealed a resilience that astonished the onlookers. Where others would have lost consciousness or shown visible signs of extreme distress, he maintained a remarkable equilibrium. Observers noted how he avoided further injury by instinctively protecting his most vulnerable areas, as if some hidden internal map guided his movements. This level of awareness was rare for any adult, let alone a 12-year-old child. People began to murmur, initially in disbelief, and then in awe, as they slowly recognized that his survival was not just luck. It was evidence of an innate strength and intelligence that was almost uncanny. Another critical sign came from his response to care and attention. Those attempting to administer basic first aid, cool water, bandages, or rudimentary remedies, observed that he cooperated in ways that suggested both comprehension and determination. He seemed to understand, almost intuitively, what he needed to do to protect himself, conserve energy, and remain stable. This mental presence, combined with his physical endurance, offered hope that he could navigate the days ahead, a stark contrast to what everyone had initially expected. For those witnessing it, it was clear that survival was not just a matter of chance. The boy was actively participating in his own recovery. Even the smallest movements, like his ability to shift slightly without further harm or his gradual intake of food and water, became monumental indicators. Each successful action was a victory, reinforcing the idea that his body and mind were working in tandem to overcome what should have been fatal. Neighbors, family members, and fellow slaves watched in a mix of amazement and relief, noting that this child was exhibiting signs of resilience that were almost unheard of in such a brutal environment. Every subtle improvement became a narrative of hope, a demonstration that life could indeed persist even under the harshest conditions. Ultimately, these early signs of survival marked a turning point in the story. What began as a shocking accident evolved into a testament to the extraordinary human capacity for endurance. The boy was no longer merely a victim of circumstance. He was a figure who embodied determination, intelligence, and the sheer will to live. Observers couldn't help but sense that this was more than a tale of survival. It was the beginning of a legend, one that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the human body, resilience, and the power of the mind. In 1862, medical knowledge in Mississippi, and across much of the United States, was still rudimentary by modern standards. Hospitals were few, medical schools were nascent, and scientific understanding of the human body was limited. Doctors relied on observation, guesswork, and trial and error treatments, and what we now consider basic hygiene was often ignored. In rural communities, especially on plantations, medical care for enslaved children was practically non-existent. This meant that the young boy at the center of our story had survived not just an accident, but a world in which the very tools that might have helped him were scarce or improperly used. The local doctor who conducted the experiment had some formal knowledge, but even his understanding was rudimentary and often mixed with practices that bordered on the experimental or dangerous. Remedies involved potions, poultices, and chemicals applied with little thought to side effects. Pain management was crude, relying on alcohol or opiates, and infection prevention was mostly ignored. For a child already injured, every intervention was a gamble. While the doctor and his assistants sought to maintain control over the boy's condition, they were working in a world where the human body was still largely a mystery, and surviving such trauma was considered nearly impossible. Despite these limitations, the boy displayed a remarkable ability to work with what he had. He instinctively avoided further injury and managed his exposure to the makeshift treatments applied to him. Where others might have succumbed to improper care, he seemed to understand, almost instinctively, which actions would help and which could harm. This interplay between primitive medicine and the boy's resilience highlighted a strange paradox. He survived not because of science, but in spite of it. The doctors may have believed they were guiding his recovery, but it was his intelligence, awareness, and endurance that truly kept him alive. This lack of medical knowledge also made the boy's survival even more remarkable to those who witnessed it. Families, neighbors, and fellow slaves were astounded that someone could endure a potentially fatal accident without proper care. In an era when children frequently died from injuries that we would consider treatable today, his survival challenged the limits of contemporary understanding. People began to speak in hushed tones about how extraordinary his endurance was, and questions arose: was this luck or something more? Could the human body, under extreme mental and physical fortitude, surpass the expectations of doctors and scientists of the time? Ultimately, the role or absence of medical knowledge in this story underscores a larger truth. Survival in this period often relied on willpower, instinct, and resilience rather than the interventions of professionals. The boy's story became a testament not to the science of the era, but to the human spirit and the remarkable adaptability of a child forced to navigate one of the harshest realities imaginable. While medicine failed to provide certainty, it also highlighted the extraordinary strength of a young boy who, against every known odds, not only survived, but thrived, leaving witnesses and future generations in awe of what the human body and mind could endure. What truly set this boy apart in 1862 Mississippi was not just his survival, but the way he endured trauma with a strength that seemed almost superhuman. From the moment the accident occurred, it was clear that his resilience went beyond physical endurance. Every movement, every breath, every cautious step revealed a mind that was fully engaged in the task of surviving. In a world where enslaved children were expected to obey and endure, His ability to combine instinct, intelligence, and sheer determination was extraordinary. He had learned, through hardship and observation, how to navigate a reality that was both physically demanding and emotionally brutal. Physical resilience was only part of the story. The boy's innate strength was equally remarkable in the mental realm. Even while injured and in shock, he demonstrated focus and clarity, assessing the dangers around him and making decisions that would preserve his life. This was not passive survival, it was active engagement with every obstacle that presented itself. Witnesses later described him as calm, almost eerily composed, moving with precision that defied his age and circumstance. For a child who had spent years in forced labor, under oppressive conditions, this combination of mental and physical resilience became a defining trait. His survival also highlighted the extraordinary adaptability of the human body and mind when pushed to extremes. While others would have succumbed to panic, exhaustion, or infection, he instinctively conserved his energy and avoided unnecessary risks. Each decision was a calculated move, whether it was the way he positioned his body to minimize pain or how he accepted rudimentary medical care while avoiding further injury. These behaviors suggested a deep, almost instinctual understanding of his own limits, as though his body and mind were cooperating in perfect unison to ensure he endured what no child should ever have to face. Resilience, however, extended beyond the immediate aftermath of the accident. In the days and weeks following, the boy continued to show remarkable stamina and determination. He recovered faster than expected, navigated his environment with alertness, and inspired those around him through the sheer willpower he displayed. People who had previously doubted the possibility of his survival began to witness not only recovery, but thriving. This was a young life redefining the very concept of endurance in a society where children were often overlooked and survival was assumed to be fragile and fleeting. Ultimately, the boy's incredible resilience and innate strength became the heart of his story. It was more than just surviving a near-fatal accident. It was about enduring a harsh world, challenging the assumptions of those around him, and demonstrating that human potential could exceed expectations, even under unimaginable circumstances. His story reminds us that strength is not always measured in size or age, but in determination, intelligence, and the courage to persist when all odds are stacked against you, a lesson that resonates as powerfully today as it did in 1862 Mississippi. After days of uncertainty and cautious observation, a critical turning point emerged in the boy's struggle for life. It was not a single moment of magic, but a combination of instinct, environmental factors, and sheer willpower that began to tip the scales in his favor. Slowly, the body that had endured the accident and brutal experiments started to stabilize. His breathing became deeper, his color returned, and the subtle strength in his movements hinted that the worst was behind him. Witnesses began to whisper among themselves, recognizing that the boy was no longer merely surviving. He was actively reclaiming life from the brink of death. This turning point was amplified by the boy's unique awareness of his own body. Unlike many others in the same circumstances, he instinctively understood what he needed to do to prevent further damage. He avoided exerting himself unnecessarily, adjusted his position to relieve pain, and instinctively sought comfort in ways that protected fragile wounds. Even in the absence of proper medical care, his actions demonstrated a remarkable understanding of survival mechanics. Observers, initially anxious and doubtful, began to see that the boy was not just resilient, he was in some way in control of his recovery. External factors also played a role in this remarkable recovery. Friends, family members, and sympathetic individuals in the community contributed with care, food, and protection, creating a small network of support that allowed his body to heal. Their cautious attention, combined with his own instinctual behaviors, created the perfect environment for recovery. Yet even with assistance, many remarked that it was the boy's own determination that had tipped the balance. He was neither passive nor helpless. He participated actively in his survival, turning adversity into a testament to human endurance. The turning point also carried a psychological dimension. Up to this point, survival had been largely instinctual, a series of reflexive actions and mental calculations under extreme duress. As the days passed, and he realized he was still alive, a spark of hope ignited within him. This mental shift, from fear and shock to determination and confidence, proved pivotal. Human resilience is often as much about mindset as it is about physical capability. And in this case, the boy's growing sense of agency and purpose accelerated his recovery. The combination of mind, body, and environment created a rare synergy that allowed him to truly turn the corner. Ultimately, this turning point solidified the boy's story as one of extraordinary endurance. It was the moment when survival became sustainable, when the impossible began to feel attainable. From near certain death, he emerged not only alive, but strengthened by his ordeal, a living testament to the power of resilience, awareness, and determination. The boy had endured the unthinkable, and this turning point marked the transition from survival to legend, a moment that would inspire awe and disbelief for generations to come. The boy's survival did more than amaze those who witnessed it. It forced a reevaluation of the limits of human endurance in the scientific community of the time. In 1862, medicine and biology were still in their early stages, particularly in rural Mississippi. Doctors believed the human body had predictable limits, and the notion that a child could survive conditions that would have killed most adults seemed impossible. Yet here was living evidence, challenging assumptions about physiology, resilience, and the interplay between mind and body. Scholars, neighbors, and observers alike were confronted with a reality that could not be ignored. The human spirit and instinctual intelligence could defy the expectations of science. One of the first lessons was the importance of observation. Before this incident, survival and recovery were often viewed as passive processes, something that simply happened with care or luck. The boy's story demonstrated that conscious, active participation in one's own survival could dramatically alter outcomes. His instinctive decisions, from how he positioned his body to how he managed minor injuries, revealed a form of self-guided care that science had yet to fully understand. Observers began to realize that resilience was not just a physical phenomenon, but a dynamic process, combining body, mind, and environment in ways that textbooks had not anticipated. The incident also shed light on the limitations of contemporary medical interventions. While doctors had attempted to guide the boy's recovery, many of their treatments were crude or even potentially harmful. Yet despite this, he survived. This suggested that traditional science alone was insufficient to explain human endurance. The boy's body and mind worked in harmony, adapting to trauma and circumventing limitations imposed by lack of medical knowledge. The lesson was clear. Understanding human survival required more than formulas or observations in controlled settings. It required acknowledging the role of instinct, mental focus, and environmental adaptation. Another lesson came in the form of inspiration for future observers. His survival challenged prevailing notions of vulnerability and mortality, particularly for children and those living under harsh conditions. Communities, educators, and even early scientists began to ask new questions. Could resilience be nurtured? What role did psychological determination play in physical survival? How much did upbringing, experience, and intelligence influence outcomes in life-threatening situations? The boy's ordeal became a case study, not for its scientific procedures, but for the extraordinary capacity of the human being to endure, adapt, and prevail under unimaginable circumstances. Ultimately, the boy's story taught lessons that transcended science and touched on universal truths about human potential. It reminded witnesses and historians alike that nature, circumstance, and human ingenuity could combine to create outcomes that defied expectation. Survival was no longer merely a function of external care or biological luck. It was a testament to awareness, resilience, and courage. In challenging contemporary science, the boy's tale became a symbol of the limitless potential of the human body and mind. When faced with adversity, a lesson as relevant today as it was over 150 years ago. The boy's incredible survival did not fade with time. Instead, it became a story that resonated far beyond the small Mississippi community where it began. Over the years, his ordeal was recounted as a tale of extraordinary resilience, a child who had defied death against unimaginable odds. Stories like his carried lessons of courage, mental fortitude, and the boundless capabilities of the human spirit. For future generations, his story became more than a historical anecdote. It became a symbol of hope, illustrating that survival is as much about inner strength as it is about circumstance or luck. One of the most profound aspects of his legacy was how it challenged perceptions of vulnerability. At a time when children, particularly enslaved children, were often considered fragile or expendable, his survival stood as a striking counterexample. He demonstrated that resilience could come in the smallest and most unlikely of forms, inspiring those who heard of his story to reconsider assumptions about weakness and strength. His tale encouraged people to see human potential differently, emphasizing that determination, awareness, and courage could defy expectations, no matter one's age or status in life. The boy's story also had a ripple effect on the study of human endurance and survival. While science had been limited in understanding how the body and mind could cope with extreme trauma, accounts of his survival prompted questions about instinct, resilience, and the role of mental fortitude in recovery. Even decades later, researchers and storytellers cited his experience as an example of the body's capacity to endure when guided by awareness and intelligence. In this way, his life became not only an inspiration but also a source of inquiry, pushing observers to explore what truly enables humans to survive against all odds. Beyond the realm of science, the boy's tale inspired countless stories of courage, determination, and perseverance. Writers, historians, and storytellers turned to his experience as a model of human endurance, weaving narratives that highlighted the intersection of intellect, instinct, and strength. His survival became a touchstone for anyone facing seemingly insurmountable obstacles, proving that hope and determination could triumph even in the darkest circumstances. In essence, his story became part of a larger cultural memory, a beacon for those who seek inspiration from real, life accounts of extraordinary resilience. Ultimately, the legacy of the boy from Mississippi transcends the specifics of the accident or the era in which it occurred. His survival is a testament to the power of human resilience, the potential for the mind and body to work in harmony, and the enduring impact that a single life can have on history. Through his experience, generations have learned that even in the harshest conditions, strength, intelligence, and courage can create outcomes that defy expectation. The boy's story continues to inspire, a timeless reminder that's not just about living, it's about enduring, adapting, and emerging stronger than anyone could have imagined.